Hello everyone. We're at the beginning now of our webinar titled Sustainability Strategies for ATE Projects and Centers. My name is Mike Lisecki. I'm here at the Maricopa Community Colleges in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's our privilege to host this webinar today, brought to you by ATE Central and Ithaca S&R. We'll tell you more about those two organizations in just a moment. Let me tell you briefly about the webinar system that we're using today. I know many of you are familiar with it, but let's go through some of the key points. In the slide or the area that you see right now, there's a section called the whiteboard. Obviously, that's where the presentation is done today. And now I want to turn your attention to two of the boxes that are highlighted on the left of that main screen, called the participant box and the chat box. The chat box is where you will send your questions. Now, it's on the very lower left of your screen, so use that, and use the Room tab. By the way, if you look up at the upper left of the participants window, you can see everyone who's participating in this webinar, who's joined us today. You might know some of the people, and you're perfectly free to send them a message just by double-clicking on their name. That will send them sort of a private message. You can chat with them if you like. Be aware that the moderators see all of the chat that's going on. So okay, we've covered the participant window, we covered the chat box. Now today we're going to be asking you questions using the polling feature. Sometimes it's a little hard to find this polling feature unless you've used it before. But if you go to the very top of the participant window, where it says participants, right at the top on the left, there's four horizontal icons. There's sort of like one of those smiley faces, and then a hand. There's a little checkbox in the last one. That's the polling box. So when it comes time for the poll, click on that to put in your answers. I'll remind you again as we get closer to the start of that. That's pretty much it for the webinar system. It's pretty easy to use. I want to welcome you again to this webinar. And here we are. Welcome today. This webinar is recorded. And for those of you who have registered for the webinar, you will be getting a link to the recording and a link to the slides for this webinar as well. I'll remind you of that as we go forward. Our title today, again, Sustainability Strategies for ATE Projects and Centers. Let me introduce our first presenter today. Many of you know Rachel Bauer. She's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she is the PI for ATE Central. Rachel, ATE Central is often the glue that holds the centers and projects together. Welcome to today, and tell us a little bit more about yourself for the audience.
Hi everybody, great to be here. This is a topic that Mike knows and many of you know is near and dear to my heart. I direct a research center called Internet Scout Research Group at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and ATE Central is one of several projects that we've had over the years. We are pretty much a soft money funded center, and so sustainability is a topic that's very, very important to me. I'm really excited to be joined today by Nancy Marin from Ithaca S&R. She's the Program Director of Sustainability and Scholarly Communications. Nancy, do you just want to say hello really quick?
Hi folks, glad to be here today.
Nancy's going to tell you a little bit more about the work that Ithaca has done in sustainability in just a minute, but I thought it would be good to start out by talking a little bit first about our plan for today. So we are in, as you have probably guessed, the welcome portion of our plan. And we're going to be talking about what sustainability is and some specific issues that relate to the ATE community and ATE projects and centers. And then we're going to be talking about some training opportunities that are coming up, as well as some next steps. I thought it might be nice to start all of this by talking to you a little bit about how these training opportunities came into being, and this webinar being the first of a whole series of training opportunities over the next 4 years. ATE Central as Mike said, acts as a sort of information hub for the whole ATE grantee community. We work to support and promote the work that everyone's doing in the program through a set of services, publications, and tools. And those are specifically designed with AT projects and center needs in mind, and the audiences that many of you are trying to reach through your work with ATE. Just as a reminder, there may be, many of you on the webinar today are familiar with ATE, but just in case you're not as familiar, ATE stands for Advanced Technological Education. It is an NSF-funded program. It supports a whole array of different types of grants, projects, centers, and research grants. And it's really NSF's only program with this focus on community colleges and workforce development and technician training. It's been around for about 21 years, and there are approximately 300 projects and centers that are funded nationally. If you go over to the right-hand list here, you can see some of the things that AT projects and centers are involved with: professional development, curriculum development. They're funded to work on things like internships and externships. Industry partnerships are very, very important in ATE projects and centers. And it's a really diverse community, so everything from welding to nanotechnology and some things you might not expect, like vitacology as well. So just so that we know a little bit more about you, this gives us a chance to practice polling. I just am curious about if you currently have or have previously had an NSF ATE award.
So Rachel, let's remind everyone, excuse me for interrupting you there, let's remind everyone to go up to that polling button. I can see a bunch of people are putting in their answers there. This is a pretty simple question, right? It's either yes or no. So
that's a good one.
Yeah, let's say, hurry up, folks. Okay, I'm going to count down, Rachel, to 5 seconds, and then we'll take a look at the results of the poll. So let's give them 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There it is. Now let me position.
There we go.
Rachel, there we go. Okay, that's
okay,
what's done.
So it looks like 45% of you currently have or have had an NSF grant. So a pretty big percentage, and there are some of you that haven't. Some of you may be writing proposals right now, or you just may be interested in learning a little bit more about sustainability and ATE. So why sustainability? For those of us in the AT community who have grants, this is sort of a question that I think we sort of almost take for granted. NSF asks folks who are putting in proposals to have a sustainability component. By sustainability, we mean that the deliverables created under your funding have a life after the grant funding runs out, and what you sustain and how you sustain it is all based on the deliverables in your proposal. And Nancy's going to be talking a little bit about those kinds of things as she gets into the meat of today's webinar. But ATE Central, in its role as acting as a service provider to ATE, did a needs survey in 2011 asking folks in the community what their biggest challenges were, what they felt like they wanted support in. And as you can see here, this second one, I'm doing a bad job of highlighting, but I'm giving it a shot. That second row is sustainability. Now, outreach and dissemination is the first area that folks indicated they wanted some support in. And we do a lot of work in outreach and dissemination, so we felt really good about that. But at that point, we really didn't do anything around sustainability. And if you notice, the orange part of the line is significant support wanted. And sustainability with 40%, almost 41, topped the list of significant support wanted by a large amount. And so we really felt like this was an area that folks wanted more support in, and that was ripe for some kind of a service. And so having known the folks at Ithaca for a long time, probably 10 years or more, and been familiar with the really interesting work they were doing around sustainability, we collaborated in our last grant to add in a whole set of sustainability services. And the training opportunities from Ithaca are what Nancy is going to be describing over the next little while. So we're really, really excited to be kicking this off today with this first webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to Nancy now, who's going to be talking to you about Ithaca and the sustainability services. Nancy?
Thanks, Rachel. And hello again to everybody. I feel like some of you I may well have met at a couple of the last PI meetings. Rachel and ATE Central were kind enough to invite Ithaca SNR in on a couple of occasions to do some early versions of the sustainability workshop. And we are thrilled to get to participate now over a much longer period of time, to work with you. But just a few words about who we are. Ithaca, all caps, is the name of a not-for-profit organization that includes these three parts. So you may have heard of JSTOR. It's been around since 1995. It's a major collection of digitized scholarly material, primarily scholarly research articles, and now also books and also primary sources. Portico is a digital preservation service that many libraries and organizations participate in. And then there's us in the middle, Ithaca SNR. So we are a research and strategy-based group. We started by doing public research reports. We now have consulting clients. We work with anyone who has questions about business planning in the areas that kind of are at the intersection of higher education, technology, scholarly communications. So that brings an awful lot into the mix. The three bullets here, research, consulting, and training, also show that we have added this area of training in the last several years as we began to build our own capacity to understand more through the research and consulting we had done. The group I work with in particular has been focused on sustainability. And I'm going to spend some time in today's session telling you a little bit about how we see that. It may be a definition that's a little bit different from the one that you are used to. But just up front to let you know that the fruits of our labor have resulted in a lot of published reports. They are free and available on the Ithaca SNR website. And they've touched on the business planning questions from a lot of points of view. We've talked about things that have to do with what kind of mindset do you need to be a leader in this fast-moving environment? What are the actual business models and specific revenue models that might be most applicable to your work? We've done a bunch of case studies where we actually look not just at what the current model is, but how did the leaders make choices to choose that model and develop it over time? And then most recently, we updated our revenue model piece. So that's the last one on the lower right. But the link is there. The Ithaca SNR website has all these reports, and I hope if you're interested, you'll come and take a look. So I think we imagine this might be a good time to take a pause and ask if there are any questions before we jump into the sustainability definition. So Mike, do you think anyone has any questions up front?
We do have a couple of questions. Nancy, you mentioned Ithaca's reports. Are they listed on your websites? Or are they free? Can anybody get them? How do we access them?
Yeah, I mean, any report, so much of our work is actually grant funded. So, and the stipulation is always, it's our promise to make these as freely and widely available as possible. So they're all available on our website at the link on the slide prior. In addition, on the last slide here, you'll see I've given everyone a short possible reading list of some reports that might be particularly relevant. And we'll be providing more information and more links so that you can drill in and you can find the most useful materials that we've produced anyway as we go through the workshops and webinars.
One other question for you, Nancy. You mentioned that you worked on projects in the past. Any of them involved where people are trying to sustain something? I mean, do you have an example maybe that you could illustrate a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's funny. You'll see the definition that we're going to present. It's a fairly broad definition, and the answer is anyone who comes to us for some sort of a consulting project, that's a business planning question, is facing something we consider a sort of a sustainability challenge. It might look like I have to figure out why not that many people are using the thing I built for them. Or it may be things were going great under this grant, but we want to shift. We want a little more independence in how we run. So what kind of a model could we put together? So the kinds of people we've worked with have been university libraries, grant-funded projects, and the grantees could be from anywhere. We've worked with NSF grantees, folks with NEH and humanities-based grants, folks from big libraries. So a range of kinds of people. And what's kind of amazing is that the fundamental of this question is very, very transferable. The specifics are awfully different, you'll see, but and I'm sure you'll agree. But some of the core methods for thinking about them are the things we'll be talking about together.
Oh, good. We've got one more question, Nancy. I think I'm going to toss this one to Rachel, and then we'll ask you to continue. Rachel, there was a question. You partially answered it in the chat window, and let me pull up the question here. You know how these chat windows sort of slide away from you. Is sustainability planning an allowable expense? Suppose you've got your funding, and you're in the second year of your center or whatever. Can you use funds to, in this case, hire a contractor to develop a sustainability plan? I actually don't know the answer to that. Would you know, Rachel? Come back up.
I don't know. I'm sorry, I was on mute. I don't know the answer to that either, Mike, but I suspect that you probably could, in that many people bring in an evaluator to help with evaluation planning. It may be that that's an allowable expense. I mean, for most people, the plan needs to be in place when you put your proposal in. So you should have the plan fleshed out by then. I think that in some ways, a lot of what you're doing in carrying out your sustainability plan is related to evaluation too. So it may be that your evaluator can fill some of the roles of helping move forward with your sustainability plan. But it's a great question, and I'll definitely find that out.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be curious to hear for this particular program what that looks like. But I can share that it's absolutely allowable for many of the consulting clients we work with come to us because they've done just that. It's often that a grant may have helped them to produce first a proof of concept, then something that goes into some kind of a beta phase, and then it gets launched and it's operational, it's going well. But there's usually a moment of transition. And when it hits that moment of transition, whatever kind of project it is, the logic for what it's going to look like the day after the grant ends is quite different from what the logic might have looked like underneath that grant, as the grant was supporting it. So it's the difference in a lot of ways between carrying out a grant where the operational costs are kind of protected for that duration, and actually being right up against all the pressures of the market. So that's exactly the time that a consultant is often called in to help see how that next phase is going to run.
Well, thank you both for that answer. Nancy, let's encourage folks to continue putting their questions in the question window, the chat window, I guess. And why don't you go ahead and take us forward?
Sure. So it would be useful to just suggest the way we see sustainability, to kind of put it out there. Hopefully it's a little bit provocative, not entirely something that you've seen before, and then I'd be happy to have questions about the things that you'd like to know more about. So sustainability. We'd like to suggest, sometimes people hear the word sustainability and feel that it's very close to the word kind of survival. And the logic is things shouldn't disappear. They shouldn't fail. What can we do to protect that? And I'd like to suggest that we know grant projects, as they're funded, they really fail. You can be protected within that grant period, and that's not the issue. We want to aim much, much higher, both during the grant and after the grant. So the notion of sustainability that we'd like to think about is something much more proactive, aiming for much higher impact, much more dynamic than just let's keep things alive. So what are some risks without that? We'll take the kind of counter argument. If nothing is really being done to look to that forward stage and to keep a project alive and alert to the changes in the environment and the changes in its stakeholders' needs, what can happen? You've probably seen this. Without updating and new attention being paid, you can have elements that start to get a little dated. You could have, if you have technical elements, they can quickly go out of date, which leads to all kinds of fun problems, even with basic questions of accessibility. More subtle maybe, and more subtle over time, you can notice either flat usage or a certain decline in usage and the impact. And I think we all got into this to see those impacts and to see them increasing and growing, not to see them flat and or declining. And finally, at a very pragmatic level, there are lots of things that were put out there and very grand goals in those early stages, and we certainly want to see all of our efforts hit those goals. In a best case, when the sustainability plan is really clicking, you want to see a cycle of increased and ongoing support that leads to more usage and impact. You want to see the cost base being run in a really efficient way, but still allowing enough in there to support further development and growth. If this is all going well, you're hoping that you'll have lots of measurable impact that you can bring back as a reason to get more funding, either from funders or even from customers or partners. And this cycle is what you're looking for to be the thing that continues going forward. So maybe this is a good time for our next poll question. When you think about the project or center that you are running, how do you think about it? Do you A, see it as something that is going to continue to grow and evolve over time? B, are you hoping for the time being just to find a good, safe place to preserve the good things you've done? Or A and B, is it a little bit of both? So Mike, do we have that poll going?
Yeah, it's running right up there. See, people are answering to it. Remember, folks, use the polling box at the top of the screen. They're thinking, Nancy. They're a little slower on this one. Come on, this isn't that hard a question, folks. So please use your polling buttons there. Now we're getting some responses. Yeah.
We intentionally didn't include an option D. That would have been neither.
Yeah, that's right. That's good.
It's not a permissible answer.
Nancy, let's give them just another 5 seconds. Come on, folks, make your choices. A, you want to continue to grow over time, or you want to find a good place for it, or both. Nancy, I'm going to count down from 5, and then we're going to take a look at the results of this poll. So here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let me reposition this, Nancy, down here so we can see it. Okay, there's the results.
All right, so I think everyone can see, and this is great. I think this is what you'd all hope to see, is most people are looking for a combination of those things. They're going to look for some areas that are going to continue to grow and expand, and for other elements you might just need a safe plan for the future. So that's terrific, and I think that the way we're thinking about it is very much aligned with the way you're thinking about it, and hopefully we'll be able to help you to do a bit of both. So as you can see, we're looking at sustainability not just as something inscribed once as law, but as a cycle and an evolving cycle. The definition I've put out there to you is that sustainability is the ability to generate or gain access to all those kinds of resources you're going to need. Some might be financial, some might be not financial. But they're the resources you need in order to protect and increase the value of the content or the service for the people you made it for in the first place. So this definition builds into it the notion that, first of all, what you've created is not just for the team that created it, but it's for the people that you did it for, obviously. And secondly, that the things you need, some will be purely financial and some will be a little bit more nuanced. They might be in-kind contributions, volunteer work, other things. But the sustainability plan is going to be a really well-tested strategy for getting those resources in an ongoing way, not just a one-shot infusion, but an ongoing cycle of support that's going to let you keep doing that over time. Just to repeat this point a bit, we know it's not just about the money, right? So sources of direct support can be direct funding through grants, through donations. It can be revenue generation. We've heard of lots of you experimenting with that or actually doing it quite well. But it really is also in-kind contributions from your host institution. It can be in-kind contributions from your industry partners. And it can be different kinds of volunteer labor. So another pause for questions. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask?
There is a question, Nancy, for you, and it's as you're thinking about sustainability, what sort of horizon do you put in your plan? I mean, do you think about a 1 year, a 3, a 5 year? What would you guess would be a typical horizon for your sustainability thinking? Obviously, it can't be forever. So what do you think?
Yeah, I guess that is actually a pretty hard question. Actually, I'd be curious to know if others have thoughts on it. It feels like these days, few people are willing to go out with anything longer than really a 3-year plan. I think 5-year even feels like a big commitment given how rapidly the environment seems to be changing in certain fields in particular. But having a view to the next, say, 3 to 5 years feels like a good margin. I think the other thing you'll hear me say time and again is that when you first invent this plan, and a good example are the sustainability sections of grant proposals, a lot of it's going to be quite wishful, hopefully based in some evidence, but it's a hope. And what makes it a real plan is the ongoing testing and improvement of it over time. So even if you take a longer horizon, the logic is that you'll be continuing to tweak it and improve it within that time as well.
Sure, that makes sense.
This is Rachel too. I think some of it for anyone who's writing a proposal, a lot of what they're faced with is how long their grant proposal is. So if you're writing a 5-year grant, you may have a very different set of timelines than if you're just doing a grant that's 2 years. So I think, in some ways, in terms of sustainability planning with an ATE, folks are have some guidelines based on the amount of time that their grant proposal is written for.
That makes sense. Now, Rachel, as long as we've got you on, let me throw you the $64,000 question. I guess that dates me, doesn't it? Does the NSF define? One of our participants wants to know: does the NSF define sustainability? That might be a hard question.
Well, it is a hard question. However, I will say this: we are lucky with an ATE in that, unlike many other programs at NSF, there is discussion of sustainability right in the RFP. So if you go online and grab the RFP, there's a whole, not only a sort of paragraph on sustainability on page 4, and they talk about the fact that a project or center is expected to communicate a realistic vision for sustainability and a plan for achievement. It is expected that at least some aspects of both centers and projects will be sustained or institutionalized past the period of award funding. And we'll get into this in a little while because Nancy does talk about this, that for many projects and centers it may be that they're not trying to sustain the entire set of services they've created. And NSF recognizes that by saying that it's at least some aspects. And then they go on to talk about some examples. So you can find that in the RFP. I encourage you to do that. And there's also more information about sustainability under each of those projects and center definitions and discussions in the text from NSF.
Well, good. That's a little easier than I thought. I should have looked at the solicitation. I didn't realize they had gone to that level of detail. That's good. I don't think that was the case years ago.
I don't think so either. I think that's newer. I agree.
All right, we're good. Timing is looking good today, folks. Nancy, why don't you go ahead and take us forward into your next session?
Sure. Well, I wanted to also thank everybody for participating. Many people engaged in a survey that Rachel and I sent out earlier this year. And in this section, we'll share a little bit with you about what we've been hearing you say about the issues you have concerning sustainability. But before we even get there, this is the time perhaps to mention that the reason for undertaking that piece of research is the longer-term engagement I mentioned at the top of the session. Thanks to ATE Central, Ithaca SNR will be in a position to work with you over the course of the next few years to deliver 1 workshop and 4 webinars each year. So the early research we did this year, which involved a survey and some phone interviews, and will be continuing in sort of an ongoing way, is to make sure that when we frame the curriculum for the workshop and the webinars, it really is going to be the things that are going to be the most useful for you. So, if that's again, another invitation to continue to let us know what things you wish we would cover. We'll see what we can do. When we did the survey, we got about, I guess we have about 75 responses. And I guess not surprisingly, most people were project PIs, and we had, I guess, about 9 directors of centers as well in the mix, and a few others as well. We learned that among the respondents, most actually had been funded in 2009 or later. We had a nice collection of people whose grants were also coming to an end in this next bracket. And I mean, on one hand, this may be a typical cycle, so I won't try to read too much into that. But looking at that also makes us realize that, you know, there's always with those dates on the horizon, it means that many of the projects, and certainly some of the people I spoke with in the interviews, for them this is a very real and pressing question. Grant funding may have just come to an end. It may be coming to an end. And so determining what those forward-looking strategies are is actually quite an urgent issue. One of the things we asked was what sources of support, financial support in this question, you're currently enjoying. And the greatest number obviously cited the ATE grant, but that's kind of cheating really because that's how we found you in the first place. But we thought we'd show you this slide just to illustrate that there's a really wide range of types of support in the mix. So we kind of get that there's the NSF strand, but there are other grants as well. There are federal grants, there are private foundation grants, there's some earned income of different sorts, as well as donations and other philanthropy. So we were really interested to see the breadth. I think that's something we can think about going forward as well. So given all those different sources, which would lead one to be somewhat optimistic, poll question number 3, how confident are you that your current primary source of funding is going to continue at the same or a higher level in the future? Choice A, extremely confident. Choice B, pretty sure. Choice C, neutral. Choice D, unsure. And choice E, extremely uncertain of this funding source.
Yeah, I think we have a number of people. Sorry, I have a number of people responding here, so let's give them a couple of minutes. This is a harder one.
This is a harder one, and entirely subjective, of course. But we're trying to take the temperature a little bit about how comfortable people feel with what they've got right now and what they see coming down the pike.
Okay, folks, let's give them, Nancy, what do you think, another 5 seconds or so? Are they confident or unsure or somewhere in between or really uncertain?
Yeah, I give us another 30 seconds here just to see if we can get some more folks. I would love to hear, get a sense of where people are with it.
Okay. I have to admit, I myself am struggling between whether I should put in B or E. I think a few years ago I might have been more confident, but today it seems less so. Sorry, I don't mean to be distracting people from their answers. Okay, I'm going to count down 5 seconds, and then we'll see what we've got. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. Let me reposition this over here. Okay, Nancy, that's what you got.
All right. So, folks, what do we think? So, well, the good news is that the worrisome category would be if we saw a huge number on choice E. And I guess it's good to see that that's not the case. And it's great to see that so many did feel at least pretty sure. But I think that D category is still worth worrying about a little. So this is, again, something that puts us in mind of kind of how urgent the need is to fix this. If things are going well and there's no problem, then perhaps we've already hit on a great sustainability strategy. And if not, then maybe it's something we can work on together. In terms of the other kinds of support that people gain, we asked about non-financial support. So we asked about volunteer time, in-kind support from the host and from industry partners. And we also thought that this was extremely important because it's something that we hear. The revenue generation itself is awfully complicated, but these are things that are often form the real backbone of support. So very high numbers responded here, 75% talking about how important it is to have in-kind support from their host institution or other institutions or industry partners. So this for sure is going to be something that we help you think about in the workshops going forward. We actually flat out ask people, what do you worry about? What can we help you with? And so this is kind of a lot going on in this matrix, but we did this just so we could have a chance to confirm kind of our guesses about where your greatest concerns would be. And in this case, the 3 arrows point to the top 3 choices. Your biggest concerns being identifying sources of support, demonstrating the value of the work you do to potential funders, and then understanding the work's impact among its target audiences. So again, very kind of user-facing outreach, strengthening the value proposition to your funders to get new support, and then a more generic identifying sources of support. The item below that, business planning to support sustainability, got kind of a lower score, but I'm going to throw a red arrow against that because I would argue that those 3 things on top are exactly what we're going to cover in what I've been referring to as business planning. So I think, in fact, we're going to get to touch on all of this. These are key elements to understanding the full picture. Any questions at this point?
Let's take a look and see what we've got here. Nope, there is a question. Well, maybe we should take this one later, talking about setting up a nonprofit to provide a structure for sustainability. Let's put that one till later, Nancy, when we talk about actual things. Why don't you go ahead and take us forward?
Sure. So in this next part, I'm going to give you a quick outline of some of the topics you mentioned to us, and then what Ithaca's view of kind of the flow of topics will be in the program, and that will lead us right into what the workshop opportunity will be. So we also asked you what kinds of things you cared about and how you cared about learning. You mentioned case studies would be important to you. You want to see how others like you have solved problems. You want examples of best practice, not just from here, but from anyone doing these activities, working for corporate sponsorships, thinking about information and strengthening ties to a host institution. You're looking to take very general ideas but apply them in your case to your specific project, and with exercises and guidance on how to do that. So these are things that came out of these interviews and the surveys, and these are the kind of the core elements that we're going to work with in putting together the training. In terms of specific topics, besides the matrix I just showed you, these were just the things that people wrote to us about and surfaced through the interviews. That host support piece seems so important. Many of you are doing this already, but we heard an equal number of people say, well, we're doing it, but I wish we were getting more. I wish I felt better about how strong that support was. Those industry partnerships seem like such fertile terrain, and many of you are exploring them and developing extremely strong partnerships. But again, others wish they could be maximized a bit more or diversified to have a bigger range of types of partnerships or different range of partners. And then the last piece is a little more subtle, but we're hoping we'll get to this too. Many of you, when you spoke with us, talked about how many things are actually happening that are kind of maybe to some extent out of your control, but that are having an impact on how your project works. The number of students coming into your programs, the kinds of partners that are available to you. So hopefully we can spend some time talking about the changing environment and ways that you can work with that to your best advantage. So where do we go from here is going to be our practical approach to sustainability workshop. Some of you may have already signed up for this. It's scheduled for Wednesday, October 23rd. It's scheduled at the same time as the PI conference. And the draft agenda, which we will continue to work on from now to then, is to offer a sustainability overview, including identifying your goals and where you'd like to be, a session on defining the real value of your project or center, so a definition of what a value proposition is going to be and talking about the value that you deliver to your users and your stakeholders. And the way we'll get at that is by these other 2 units, one of them on the changing environment and one of them on the value that you're imparting to users, end users, whether they're students, faculty, or host institutions. So this is a rough draft of the agenda, but you see we're trying to work with the ideas that we're getting from you to make sure that you get what you need. So I'll take a breath, and here's the home stretch, but this is the part where I'd like to share with you a bit about how we see these pieces fitting together. And why when we talk about sustainability, we sometimes align it with business planning. We really do see this as pretty much one and the same. With the grant-funded project, it often originates as someone's great idea. And I don't really mean that facetiously. It really is a great idea. It's a great idea. Someone comes up with it and tests it a bit. And that testing really should be with those end users. It could be an audience. It could be the students. And the other kind of testing is, how does this fit in the world? Who else is doing something like I'm doing? Are there a lot of other people doing it? How am I unique? Or do I stand out in that crowd? And what other kinds of external circumstances are going to have an impact on what I can do? When those factors are taken into account, it goes from being just a great idea to a really strong value proposition. And that's one of the things we love working with people to really shape up. Once you have that value proposition, it really drives everything else. So when you see the list that's on the bottom of this, now that I know what I should do, and I'm going to figure out how to do it, how to identify the cost it's going to take, and how to figure out what funding sources can help me do that. The conceptual stuff on top that has to do with the external world is going to drive you into what's really a logic model on the bottom. You can figure out what the sequence is and how you do it. And then just to drive home that this is not a one-shot project or one-shot process. It's a process that continues to change. As the environment changes, as your users change, the logic of what you're doing is likely to change as well. And so what we hope to do is work with not just the newest projects and centers, but even the ones that have been doing this successfully for a while, in case they might like a little pause to rethink what they're doing and to maybe shift direction a bit. So in brief, we see sustainability as touching on, first, what are you going to need to sustain? Then what effort are you going to need to do that? And finally, where are you going to get the resources that will require? So what we'll talk to you about, or what we'll encourage you to think about, is what does need to be sustained? Is it going to be everything you created? Is it the team you put together? Or is it just parts of that? The resources that can require could be anything from your entire management staff, or some technical staff, or people to do ongoing promotion and outreach, people to do some kind of digital preservation work if you have that, or just the regular operational costs of travel, hardware, storage, and design. So at this point, we have another polling question. How do you feel about what kind of a handle you have on what needs to be sustained in your project or center? Are these things that you know already, or that you'd like to think about a little bit more? A would be yes, and B would be no.
I wonder what having a handle means. Well, anyhow, I'm debating that with myself, Nancy. I think I've got an idea. Got to decide what I'm going to say here. So everyone, please use the polling boxes to choose yes or no here, and then Nancy will see what their sense is at this point. But quite a few people that have responded already. Come on, make your decisions, folks. It's yes or no. Okay, there's a couple more people coming in. Nancy, let's count down here, and let's see, where's my polling? There it is. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, I have to tell you,
there we go.
Mike and Rachel, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I'm actually, this is the first one I'm really surprised by, because I assumed everyone would just say, yes, Nancy, why do you keep bothering us with this question? Clearly we know. And to see that the numbers are split here is really interesting and kind of humbling too, right? So on one hand, even if you know everything that you need to sustain, it doesn't necessarily mean it's so easy to figure out how to do that. But having the chance to sit down and actually sort through in a methodical way which elements need to go forward, and which is it okay if we just let slide, or understand that they've lived a good life and we've moved into a new part of the project or center, is a really important task. So I think we have a lot that we can help with here as well. And it's not an easy question, because clearly all the time and investment that's gone into creating these things would suggest that, people are going to have more things they'd like to keep rather than fewer. So thank you for answering this one so candidly. This is very interesting. So once we've worked through with people what those things are, what activities you'll need to be doing, in other words, what's going to drive your budget really is what activities do I need to maintain. The third element is how are you going to get the resources to do that. So in-kind support from your host, volunteer contributions, and funds from donors. So for in-kind support, what we're thinking about here is, you might already be getting office space in a way that's fairly informal. Your university just allows you to set up shop. You may be borrowing staff time, or you may wish you had more borrowed staff time to support you in some of the perhaps back office functions. And there may be lots of other, I think here partner organizations is just a bullet point, but clearly we understand that in-kind support from a partner from industry is actually a potentially very huge element of your plan. In terms of volunteer support, it's one of these interesting things that's easy enough to forget when you're drafting a budget. But if you do a sustainability plan and you start to ask yourself, what elements make this thing tick? You might find yourself writing down things that don't have a dollar figure attached but are absolutely central to what you do. Is someone just pitching in by doing some writing for you or helping you with social media? Are there people coming and just lending their time because they think it's an interesting thing to do? I'm not sure what the full range of these activities might be for you, but for sure in higher ed we see scholars all the time, they donate time because they think it's something interesting. As the person running the project or center, it's worth figuring out what will make that flow of energy continue to happen for you. What will incentivize people to continue volunteering? Because what you may do may not be free. You may have to actually undertake very thoughtful and sometimes intensive activities to encourage that volunteer support to keep coming. And finally, funding sources. We are imagining people try all kinds of different things. We've heard of people who have developed textbooks. We've seen some freemium models or some licensing models. When you get quite good at doing what you're doing, you can actually sell your services as a consultant or offering guidance to others. So there's all sorts of interesting ways this can work out. This is a little more content than I thought we'd show today, but it's just to give you a flavor of some of the materials we have available to share. So this is a report we did last year, and it's something that we'll go into in detail, probably in the form of a webinar later on. But there's lots of interesting ways we can help you to think about what revenue sources might be the most suitable for your project or center. And actually, which are a terrible idea, so we can save you some time before you go down that path. So just some closing words of guidance that we like to think about as just overarching things to keep in mind. We're glad to see so many partnerships and so much collaboration because no one should go it alone in this space. Identifying those partnerships and leveraging your strengths and working off the strengths of others is going to be a big part of anyone's ongoing plan. We hope we can help you to further build up that evidence. I know you work with evaluators, and that's going to be a really key set of data to work with. And then maybe some of the business angled questions we ask can help you to further enhance the data you have to make the arguments about how you're having impact and the kind of impact you'd like to have as you make your further pitch for more support. And finally, keeping your eyes focused on who those end users are and why you're in this in the first place. It can never be too much attention. So helping you to think really big. How big is the audience that you have right now? Who are your end users? Who are those students that you're serving or the faculty that you're serving? And how big could that crowd be? So we hope we can help you think about that as well. And finally, as we mentioned earlier today, what we're going to help you do is come up with a logic for how you'd come up with a plan. But we all know that these plans are going to change. So it's going to be a set of guidance and a first draft of something that we imagine you'll continue to research and think about and iterate on as your projects and centers continue. Any questions?
Yes, Nancy, we've got a question that came up earlier, and I'd like to come back to it right now. I know you're going to be talking a little bit more about the the workshop itself, but this question, and I've heard it before too, is simply writing that I'll get another NSF grant after this one. Is that part of a sustainability plan? Obviously it's not everything, but is that a valid part of a sustainability plan? Hard question.
Is no a fair answer? Here's my answer. It all depends. I mean, what's so interesting, and I will admit that it was, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was a leader of a center who'd been running the center for a long time, kind of brought me back to reality and explained, well, actually, NSF funding was what had supported that particular center for well over a decade. And so who am I, personally, to say that that's not a good plan? That sounds like a great plan. I'd like that plan. But the reality is that, so if that is something that you feel confident about, then that is fine. The reason that we are in the business that we are in is that we have found that a lot of funded projects feel much less confident about that as a source going forward. So that's the first thing, is it depends in your particular circumstance about how likely that is. There's a deeper question in there, more nuanced explanation, which is also that sustainability plan at some point forces the logic of what you're doing up against some kind of market judgment. You know, so when you have an NSF grant, your market is the panel and your program officer who gives you the grant. A real sustainability plan can kind of stand up to the question of who cares about this? Do my end users like this enough to use it? Are my students getting what they need? Are faculty around the country adopting this curriculum? What kind of feedback am I getting that this is actually, I'm doing the right thing and I'm on the right path? So in this course, we're going to urge people to think about those kind of deeper questions. And if at the end of the day you actually get another NSF grant, well, that's great. That's great. But you should be very comfortable in the internal logic of who's finding the value in what you're doing.
Well, good answer, very thoughtful. Go ahead, Nancy, and take us through to the final section.
Sure. So, the next steps are that we are hosting this workshop. Rachel and I will both be there. And it's a half day, 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. We're going to use this as a way to dig in to what I described earlier as kind of the setup, the foundational questions of your projects and centers. You'll see I sometimes use the word project a little bit generically, but I don't want to leave the centers out of it. But just to understand and go through with people, I'll remind myself what my goals are, what those impacts are, and digging in deep on what the questions are to answer. What are my hypotheses about why people find this important, and how can I test them to make sure that those really are ringing true still? What's changing in my environment? What do I need to know about? So we're going to set that up with people in that first workshop. What's going to follow from that workshop, and Rachel and I are still finalizing what the actual topics will be, but we imagine that the 4 webinars that will roll out over the course of the year after that will be targeted to very specific sustainability strategies that I discussed in the second part of the presentation. It could be working with your institutional host. Another topic would certainly be around developing or enhancing partnerships with industry. Another topic could be different tactics of revenue generation. So, but that setup is really important, and without having a very good firm grounding in those questions, very hard to answer those second questions. So I'm hoping that we'll have a nice productive time in October, and then that people will be able to join us not just for that, but for the sessions that will follow. I just wanted to mention that the work that we're going to be sharing with you is being shaped for the ATE program, customized for ATE, but drawn from a bigger course that we've been developing over time. The Sustaining Digital Resources clearly has this digital focus, which is not really quite essential for ATE, although I know it does come into play in some places. But if you're interested, there's some material up on our website about that course as well. And we are offering you some suggestions for further reading. And Rachel, before we click on to the next slides, I wondered if there was anything that you'd like to add.
Thanks, Nancy. Just wanted to let everybody know how excited we are to be doing this. We're really looking forward to the workshop in October, and we'll be putting up a whole section on the ATE Central website around sustainability. So we'll have, as materials are created and when the webinar is being recorded, as you know, the recording will be up there. And we're also working with the folks from ATE TV to do a series of small videos around sustainability. So we'll actually be interviewing some PIs and folks from NSF and others to get some good information about interesting and innovative ways that folks are sustaining what they're doing in the community.
So I wonder if this is a good last spot for, we have a final evaluative survey, but before we get to that, did anyone have any other questions about the workshop or the program in general?
Nancy, I do have a couple of questions. Maybe either you or Rachel. Let's use Rachel for this one. Rachel, how much does it cost for this workshop?
The cost is $50. It's I think all of the pre-conference workshops are the same. And when you register, it's one of the options is to do a pre-conference workshop, and that should be something that you can charge to your grant.
Is it first come first served, or can anyone attend this?
It is first come first serve, and we have about 15 slots left. I think with most of the workshops, if I'm remembering correctly, we tend to stop at around between 30 and 40 participants, just because of room size, and also just because if you get too big, it's actually sort of difficult to do small group work and all of that. So somebody is asking desperately what a freemium is.
Yeah, desperately, yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, I know
come
that
up
too.
a couple times.
Yeah.
I kept meaning to ask Nancy to explain freemiums.
Yeah. Yeah. So, gosh, this became a big deal a while back. It's a business model that suggests it's a very popular idea that developed because of I don't even know how far back to start, but I'll give you the short version. It's a logic that a lot of material is openly available, and specifically on the internet. This is really about free digital content. And does information want to be free? Who knows, right? But a lot of people wanted a lot of open access material out there. And then the business question would come up, right, but how do I run my business? How do I make any money if I've made this freely available? So one suggestion is that open material is made openly available, but there are kind of premium values attached to it that could be monetized if needed. So what that could look like, again, is there's, let's say an image is a good example. An image is available, you can view it online, but if you are, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and you want, you might decide that if someone wants to take that image and produce it in high resolution in an illustrated art book, you might start to charge them for it. So it's the idea of having kind of like two versions or another layer of something that allows you to still have something freely available, but you get to make some money on a premium object or service that layers on top. So this is one of the things we talked about in the revenue section. Should we go on to the survey?
Yeah, let me launch the survey. Hopefully I don't make a mistake in doing it. I'll try that in a moment. While that survey's up, we're going to take a last couple of questions. So folks, help us sustain, that sounds funny. As you know, these surveys are important to demonstrate our impact. I probably don't need to tell anybody that, right? Let's see if I can launch this thing. Okay, there it is. So if you would just remember, presenters, don't touch the survey, but please just take a moment. There's just 3 questions and then a place to add your own information. Let me ask you another question about that workshop, Rachel, before we do our finals here. You think you're going to have it in future years? What if we've already signed up for something and we can't attend this year? Will it be there again next year? What's your plan?
Absolutely, Mike. That's a great question. Well, we love having the workshop at the PI meeting, of course, but there are lots of other people who want to have workshops. So what we're probably going to do is If we feel like we can do it at the PI meeting, that's great, but of course there's also another wonderful opportunity, which is High Tech, and High Tech is in July. In some ways, what's nice about High Tech is it's at a time before proposals are due, so that for folks who are working on a proposal and working on a sustainability plan, it's a time when they could actually come before those proposals are due in October from ATE and work on a workshop with Nancy and I there. So it may be that it kind of bounces back and forth between the PI meeting in October one year, High Tech the next, PI meeting next year, High Tech the final year. So that's what we're planning at the moment, and so we're hoping by putting it in both conferences, it gives folks some choices about when to come.
That's a good point. You know, Rachel and Nancy, I had a thought here. I'll just put in my own 2 cents. The National Visiting Committees often, as a project or center goes forward, start thinking about sustainability. I think it would be good to go to your NVC meeting and say, oh yes, I'm involved with this series of webinars and workshop on sustainability as evidence that you're thinking about it. That sounds like a good idea. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, here's a more complicated question now, and we've only got time, I think, for about 2 more questions. So let's make this the second to the last one. Should you involve, you addressed this briefly, Rachel, I'll ask you first, should you involve your evaluator in your sustainability plan? I mean, they're worried about impact affects sustainability. Should they be overtly involved in your sustainability plan? Rachel.
I personally think that your evaluator is somebody who has can be a huge help in thinking about sustainability, and I think Nancy would say the same, in the sense that this is somebody who you've brought in externally to in part help you look at the cycle of what you're doing and whether you're having the desired impacts that you laid out initially, and also what may be unexpected impacts that your project or center is having. So working with that person to think about what's showing up over and over each year as the most valued, most important thing that we do really informs that sustainability planning. Don't you think so, Nancy?
Yeah, it's such an amazing resource. The fact that that's kind of baked in to these grants, I think it's very important to draw on that.
So I think both of us would say yes, that involving your evaluator in sustainability planning is a really good idea.
Okay, we're going to put a checkbox next to that one, so that's good. This is a simple question. I think I'll make it our last one today, but it has to do about structure for sustainability. One of our attendees wanted to know, has anyone, to your knowledge, gone out and set up a nonprofit, maybe a 501c3 or something like that, to create an infrastructure for sustainability? That might be too much detail, but do either of you know if anyone's done that?
I'd have to ask more questions to understand what kind of infrastructure. So different, like for example, if you're talking about sustaining outputs, a lot of institutions, a lot of academic institutions in particular, through the libraries and tech departments, will have a way for you to literally deposit a curriculum unit or an article or certain discrete outputs. Yeah. Other people think about infrastructure in terms of people to handle the back end things. There might be ways to have some kind of an organizational platform or place that can provide services to a bunch of different places so they don't have to do it themselves. But I can't really answer the question without knowing a little bit more about what that would be.
I bet you that's going to be a good topic for further webinars talking about organizational structures and things like that. I think I bet you we're going to return to that one in the future. Don't you think, Rachel?
Absolutely. I mean, I think people are very interested generally, and I know others have approached me about sort of asking a similar question in terms of whether we've done it or we know anyone who has. And I mean, if you look across academia, obviously there are all kinds of people who take projects, things that started as projects, and turn them into some sort of business. The question I think that you're asking in particular, and this may have relevance in a whole different way to folks at community and technical colleges or smaller institutions, depending on that institution's capacity to hire, to work with you in hiring, in charging for services. there may be people who have created something off campus to help handle that flow of money, partly with an eye to eventually maybe moving it off, sort of a tech transfer model, maybe just because it's much easier to do it as a complementary service to what they're offering at the university or the college.
Sure. Well, folks, we're perfectly on time. I'm going to close the survey, but let me remind you first to hit the submit button on the survey. Sometimes I fill out these surveys, Rachel, and I forget to hit submit. So I thought I'd just remind people to do that. Okay, here we go. I'm going to count down. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to complete the survey. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we're back. Here's our closing slide. We wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to join today. It's clear that we love talking about sustainability. Nancy, very interesting presentation and perspective on it. And Rachel, thank you for organizing this and bringing it to our community.
You're welcome. My pleasure, for sure.
Okay, this officially concludes our webinar. Nancy and Rachel, if you'd stay on for just a minute, I'm now going to officially close the recording, which everyone will be sent a link to, and disconnect from the teleconference. So goodbye, everyone.